Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 217 of the Sixth Axis podcast. As per usual, I am your host, Kris Lipscomb. We are returning to our usual setup this week after our week away at Res. There is hopefully not an abundance of background noise. I mean, I don't know. The two people joining me might secretly be recording a party, but I don't think so. Those two people this week are, firstly, former editor-in-chief of TheSixthAxis.com and current PR man at Just Add Water. Is it? No, you're not at Just Add Water. You're at Oddworld, aren't you?
Yeah,
Oddworld Inhabitants. I get confused because you were doing other things. It's so confusing.
A lot of people are confused by that, but Oddworld and Just Add Water are two completely separate companies who are no longer working together.
Yes. Does that mean you're not working with Alex anymore?
Yeah, Alex works for Oddworld too.
Oh, okay. I thought he worked for Just Add Water. Oh, God, I don't know.
He did, for a while.
Oh, it's a confusing world, this. Like, you're a corporate climber now. I don't understand what's happening. Keep shimmying about.
I never worked for Oddworld.
You never worked for Oddworld?
No, I always worked for Oddworld. I never worked for Just Add Water.
You confused yourself now.
I have confused myself.
It's Peter. You know Peter. Peter Chapman. You know that guy in a way.
It's me.
It's him. That
wondering
one.
where the fuck Lewis is. Where's Lewis?
He doesn't do this podcast anymore.
I want Lewis. Bring Lewis back? Can I start a campaign? Can we kickstart Lewis coming back?
I mean, you have to campaign to Lewis. We didn't remove him. He left of his own accord. We weren't just like, you know what? Fuck Lewis.
That was your first mistake, Kris, giving him the sense of free will.
I know, it was a real issue when I created mankind those millennia ago. It was a real problem. Also with us this week is a writer at the Sixth Axis. It is Dave Irwin. You right, Dave?
Hello.
Formerly of One Hit Pixel and Media Kick.
That was like years ago.
That was not.
Just thinking.
That was
just as Kris was doing that introduction, I was thinking that I still think of Dave as new at TSA, and that's ridiculous because he's been there for like
almost a year.
Almost a year is not new. I've been there forever.
Yeah, all right.
I've been there like an amount of time I don't care to recall at this point.
You've probably been there like second longest now, Kris. After Tough Cub.
I think longest. I'm not sure if I'm longer than Tough Cub.
No, I think Tough Cub was there before you, I think.
It must be very similar timing, though.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, it's probably quite similar. I can't really remember a lot about I've blocked out the early days.
Yeah, it's gets to that with us all, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, time to move on. We've got plenty on this week's podcast. We are going to be talking about the news, of course. Dave's going to be talking about his time in Dark Souls 3. Peter will be talking about Superhot, which is obviously rather exciting, and GDC, and also we'll just be pimping his stuff as an employee of Oddworld, as he is contractually obliged to do.
Colluding.
Yeah.
Corporate shrill.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, did you say shill or shrill? Because he's not a corporate shrill. That would be... if he
I said shill.
Oh, okay, I
think I said shill.
I was like, did you say
I hope
shrill?
I said shill.
Just in a very high-pitched voice, shilling for his employer currently.
Sings for his supper.
In the news this week, Evolution have found a new home at Codemasters, which is obviously rather nice after the studio was shut down by Sony. So the deal, as far as we know at the minute, is that Evolution still does no longer exist. Codemasters have essentially hired everyone at Evolution that wanted the job, but they're not taking any of the IP with them, and they're not taking the name with them. Seems to be what the deal is. So at the minute, they're just not really called anything. They haven't decided on a name currently. So
Codemasters has essentially absorbed all of Evolution, which includes quite a lot of... Was it Studio Liverpool?
I think so, yeah.
The old Psyonix team.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, basically,
cool.
I think they just own game development in Liverpool now. Like, this Sony X Dev is still in Liverpool, and then I think everyone else just works for Codemasters now. That seems to be the deal. I think much like the days when Liverpool was ruled by a dockyard, it's now just ruled by Codemasters.
I think that's a good move. I think that's the good people in the right place. And if Sony are going to let me be so brash as to call them stupid enough to let a fantastic first-party studio close like that, then it's good that they got snapped up.
It wasn't a great move, was it, from Sony?
Not
I don't think so.
particularly.
I think the speed
really
with which
foolish.
Codemasters went, we'll have them then, suggests it was not a good move. Like, you
And
don't...
Codemasters very much a studio on the up. They just posted their first profit in 5 years.
Oh, that's
they're
good.
well on the road to recovery.
Yeah, but you don't just, you don't get absorbed, you don't get the entire studio absorbed that quickly. Particularly not as we're buying it and buying the IP deal. It's like we're hiring all of those people. Like, that is a very different deal and suggests, like, yeah, Sony fucked up. They should not have let them go.
Smart people at Codemasters have looked at that team and thought, well, there's very smart people working on the kind of games that we want to make.
Yeah, it's
so
like, we'll
snap them up.
We'll just have all of them, please, and you're making another Dirt game.
I just find it really strange that it was all based on, from what I can gather, the performance of Drive Club and Drive Club bikes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it didn't do what Sony wanted it to do. But then again, Sony did kind of mess up the lead up towards the release of Drive Club with all the PR marketing, the PlayStation Plus thing. So it's a cavalcade of mistakes that are not necessarily the fault of the developers. So
yeah, absolutely. I would argue that the mistakes around Drive Club's launch were probably mostly Sony's fault rather than anybody at Evolution. I think that obviously they misjudged the server load that they would be under. And I think part of that is probably due to the server capacity at Sony. And that's not necessarily Evolution's fault. And I think that they probably did all they could to recover from that. But like you say, it was just like one after another, several PR disasters surrounding that. And Sony, as the publisher, is responsible for those PR disasters. So exactly. I think it's very unfair for the studio, for those people to essentially lose their jobs because they were let down by the publisher.
Extremely unfair.
So yeah, it's really, really good to see them recover, or at least be set on the right path to recover. And I think that Codemasters are doing some good work, and I think that Evolution's obviously very talented people. I think we could see great things come out of that studio now.
Like,
oh, definitely. I was about to say in my little tirade that Motorstorm was a really big success for Sony when it was being developed by the studio, and as a result, they could make something very similar, but for Codemasters, and that will resonate with quite a lot of people. I've already heard at least a couple of people say, so when they get snapped up and they start developing under a new name, then they can have something that's like Motorstorm, and we'll buy it, and it'll be multi-platform.
Pretty much.
So.
If they do, if they just what if Motorstorm but not that name, then I think they're gonna have a hit, basically. Like, I don't think there's an awful lot of, I wouldn't say work, there's not an awful lot of thought that needs to go into the IP direction, I kind of feel, at the minute. Just do that. Just make a Motorstorm game.
Yeah. And the timing of it was so bizarre as well, because right now, the position, the place where Sony is falling down, they're so successful and they're doing so well in a lot of areas, but the place where they are really falling down is with their first-party titles. So to close the studio with a storied history of creating first-party games, I think is just bizarre.
It is.
So
it's weird.
Just on so many levels, that was just a weird move from Sony.
If you look at the other side of the coin, though, with Lionhead Studios and Microsoft essentially shutting them down as well earlier in the month, then it's a bit weird that the developers at Lionhead have not been snapped up as much, but they have been snapped up at Evolution to another studio far quicker and in far greater numbers. So
Evolution is just a perfect fit.
Just the Evolution
it's a perfect fit for what Codemasters want to do at the minute, and there isn't another the Lionhead have always been a bit of a weird studio. Just in terms of games they produce, like Fable is a big game, but in many ways it's a niche game as well. Like they're hitting a very specific target audience with those games.
But again, I think that is another case. It has similarities because it's another case of a big development studio being let down by a publisher, because the game that Lionhead was set on was the wrong kind of game at the wrong kind of time.
Oh,
and
definitely.
A studio with amazing track record of making action RPGs at a time when things like The Witcher 3 and Fallout and the Skyrim and, action RPGs are huge business right now. And Microsoft just closed the only studio they've got capable of making a top quality AAA one of those. And they did it because they'd wasted 4 years trying to make another MOBA or MMO or whatever the hell Fable Legends was going to end up being.
The closest thing that Fable Legends was actually like was a game called Dungeon Land. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that, but essentially what it was, you have 4 players who are, wandering around this dungeon, bit Diablo-esque almost. But then you had the other player, the 5th player, who is the dungeon master, and he summoned all of the monsters and stuff like that. So it was a very similar idea to that particular game. And I did play the sort of closed beta test that they were having for it at the time, and I did like it for what it was, but my problem was it's the Fable franchise. And I was bored of that from Fable 3 onwards. So the fact that they were all set on making things under the Fable IP rather than develop a brand new IP post Peter Molyneux, I think that's probably where their downfall was.
Yeah, pretty much.
Possibly. I think, personally, I'm pretty ready for, I would say at the moment what I'm ready for is a sequel to Fable 2, because I think Fable 3 fell a bit flat.
Oh, yeah. That was awful.
That's very true.
But having said that, I would have also loved to have seen Lionhead put their unique personality. And it was, the stuff they made had a real unique flavour to it.
I still maintain that Black and White was awesome.
Let's not use words like awesome.
Subjective. Purely subjective.
Yeah.
I liked it. But
it certainly had interesting ideas and high points. Yeah. And again, they have a history, and it's a real shame to see another developer let down by a publisher's bad decisions.
Yeah, like you were saying a minute ago, to close Lionhead at this point where you've got huge open world games and you've got console architecture push it on seems just bizarre. And they've seen to, like, Microsoft just went for like, oh, we want to get that the arena battler kind of niche, kind of with Fable, was it Legends is what it's called, right?
Fable Legends, yeah.
And it was just an odd thing to pick, and they kind of didn't. They were like, this game seemed to be about like 3 or 4 different things, which was an odd decision.
Yeah, it seemed very much like a lot of publishers did maybe between 5 and 10 years ago, when everybody said, let's make an MMO.
Yeah.
And then there was like half a dozen MMOs released, all within like 6 months to a year of each other. That all just completely failed because MMOs weren't a big thing. World of Warcraft was a big thing.
Well, and the problem here as well is they seem to have rammed a couple of different trends together and hoped that will make a game.
Yeah, it seems like Microsoft did the same thing. They just went, well, these are really popular genres at the minute. Everyone loves League, everyone loves like whatever.
Well, they were
so
they basically went
cram that into a Fable.
Yeah,
game.
well, they basically went, people like MOBAs, people like the microtransaction free-to-play games, people like asymmetric gameplay. What if we just shovel that together and that'll probably work with the Fable license?
Yeah, put the Fable stamp on it, and people love Fable too, so let's just put it all in one box.
Yeah.
It's a real shame.
When you look at the last 2 games for the Fable series as well, that's just really depressing. That they were just games where Microsoft was trying to hit a trend.
Well, it was the last 3, really, because you had that Kinect one, you had that 4-player brawler thing, and then Fable Legends, all of which were trying to capture a niche.
Yeah. Wait, so is Fable Legends not the 4-player brawler thing? Because I thought it was that.
No, that was... let me look it up.
And that, again, is very indicative of the failures that Microsoft made as a publisher, because none of us, who are all fairly heavily invested in the video games industry, but certainly me and Kris, don't really have much of a clue what Fable Legends was trying to be.
Yeah, because I thought it was that game where, like, that's why I said the asymmetric gameplay thing, because I thought it was the thing where, like, one of you was the bad guy, and then...
Yeah, it was that.
So,
but there was,
what's the other thing then?
There was another thing that they did as well.
It's Fable Heroes, and it was a beat 'em up.
I don't even remember that existing.
Everyone looked like puppets.
Oh, I sort of remember that. That's not a great sign when, like, I'm literally hosting a podcast about video games. I'm like, don't we remember that game?
Yeah. That was the first post-Molyneux Lionhead game, and it wasn't great.
Yeah.
And Fable the Journey, less said about that, the better, I think.
That was the on-rails shooter that definitely was not on rails.
Not on rails, no. Peter Molyneux said it wasn't on rails.
But he could,
and then made loads of journalists.
He convinced journalists to sign a wall, and they all walked out and went, "Wait, but that was on rails. How did he trick us?"
Yeah.
Lionhead is a real shame. Anyway, let's move on to more upbeat stuff. Hopefully, whatever evolutions, the staff from Evolution, the new studio they found, I really look forward to seeing what they're going to produce. Hopefully, it's something in the Motorstorm vein. Right.
And God bless Codemasters for sticking their hand in and helping British developers.
Yep. Well done, Codemasters. You've gone up in my books. Not that you were down low in any case, but you're definitely higher in my books. Good man.
I imagine you've just got a literal stack of books with publisher names on them.
Yes, I keep them in my library.
Because you didn't say higher in my book, you were like higher in my books. So I've got a stack of books, and I order them depending on how much I appreciate a specific publisher.
He's bought the entire Encyclopedia Britannica and then just sellotape publisher names over the spines.
BAFTAs.
And every month he reorders his ladder.
BAFTAs happen. The winners from the 2015 game BAFTAs. I was so confusing how this works because it is 2015, but it's also 20. I don't know. Like, it's stuff that happened in 2015, I think, is the deal here.
Stuff what happened between the last one and this one.
Yeah, which means it's the 2015 ones, according to TEF. That's what this was the title of this page says.
Well, they're listed on the BAFTA website as 2016.
Oh, I don't fucking know. Fuck that.
It's a bit weird. Everyone does their awards around Christmas for exactly this reason.
Yeah. So, quick list of breakdown of the runners. Quick breakdown of the winners in the various categories. Pretty much going to go over the big ones. Best game was won by Fallout 4.
No, it's not.
A bit weird.
No, but it did win best game.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it is best game.
That's what I said. I said it won best game. That's what I said. I did not say it is the best game.
Yeah, I'm just saying that they're wrong at BAFTA.
Yeah, but you can't argue with the fact it won best game. That's a fact. That happened. They made a bad decision.
I don't disagree with it.
Yeah, but that wasn't the point I'm making. I said it won best game, and you said no, it's not. It did win best game, Dave. You can't dispute it won best game.
The BAFTA board thinks that it was the best game.
Yeah, that's what it means.
Fair.
Best performer went to, I don't even know how to say this, Merle Dandridge? Merle Dandridge, because it's got an E on the end, it's confusing. As Kate Collins in Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Best sport game was Rocket League, obviously. I actually really like what they do with this, because like Ollie won sport last year, I think it was, and it's nice to see them giving slightly unusual titles that sport award rather than just being like, yeah, it was FIFA, wasn't it?
Well, that's because FIFA very rarely is the best sports game. I
know, but a lot of websites and stuff in their awards, even in stuff in other award ceremonies, it does seem to go to like the big EA franchises or even.
These all have to be games that have at least part of the development done in the UK.
I suppose that's true. There must be some of the FIFA developments done here. It'd be fucking weird otherwise.
Yeah, I think mostly in Canada though.
Like all games development, mostly in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Best persistent game went to Prison Architect, which is good. I really like Prison Architect.
I had to try and figure out what persistent game meant earlier, and I still don't really know.
A game that just keeps going.
Yeah, the BAFTA definition seems to be a game that's really big.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a weird category to have, but nice that Prison Architect won something.
Yeah, it's a good game.
I wonder if it was just an award that was just awarded because they wanted to give it something.
Well, when they started, they sort of run down the nominees, and it was like Prison Architect and Final Fantasy, whatever.
Yeah, like that was the MMO one.
14.
Yeah, it's like because the other ones were like MMOs, I think, and then Prison Architect. It's a bit weird.
Yeah, but they were running down the nominees, and I was thinking, oh, so it's like a game that just goes forever, that you can play forever.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I was like, oh, maybe it's like a game that goes forever in the sense of like these online games go forever. And then the last nominee was The Witcher 3. And I was like, no, that's just a game that comes in a box and you play it till you finished it and then you put it back on the shelf.
Yeah. So I think it's just like super big game.
Yeah.
Like, or perhaps open-ended, I guess. Best story went to Life is Strange, very deservingly, very, very good game. Best multiplayer, again, to Rocket League, again, very deservedly.
Yep.
Best mobile and handheld went to Her Story, which is interesting. Not saying Her Story is a bad game. I actually really like Her Story. It's just quite a interesting game to win the mobile and handheld category. The Esports Audience Award, I don't know what the fuck that is, went to Smite.
Smite has actually done exceptionally well with esports over the past 6 months or so.
Yeah, I'm not saying Smite's bad. I just don't really know what does esports, was it voted on by people who watch esports? Were they like, we like Smite the most?
It was an audience choice award.
Is it like,
right, that makes
is it
sense.
like people voting for like what the best sport is? We like football the most.
Well, that kind of makes sense on two levels, Dave, because on one level, it makes sense that the audience vote on this, and that's why it's got that name. But on another level, it makes sense that the audience vote on this because people on the BAFTA board don't have a fucking clue about esports.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, to be fair, very few people do have much knowledge of esports.
Exactly that. People in the games industry don't know about esports games, particularly.
No, apart from those who create esports-style games. And kudos to them.
Best game design went to Bloodborne, which I don't know I'd agree with. Best original property went to Until Dawn, which I also don't know I'd agree with. The One to Watch award went to Sundown by Mild Beast Games. Her Story picked up Game Innovation, which is cool. I think that game is definitely innovative. And does some super interesting things, which is cool. Best family game, again, Rocket League. Best debut game, Her Story. Audio achievement
Weird.
Went to Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Artistic achievement went to Ori and the Blind Forest. Best British game went to Batman Arkham Knight, which I know is a British game because they're based here. I just don't think of it as a particularly British game. And best music went to Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. So Everybody's Gone to the Rapture really cleaned up.
Yeah, totally agree with best music. That's really good that they got that.
100% agree.
That choral soundtrack was fantastic. I think it's weird that Sam Barlow got debut game for Her Story. He made the Silent Hill games. That's a bit weird, although I suppose it's the first one he's done
game, by himself.
So it kind of makes sense. Some weird choices in there, but I'm not sure I could really argue too much with any of them.
I mean, British game to Batman is kind of an odd choice.
Well, it's weird, but it is a game made in Britain by a British studio.
Yeah.
I would put the caveat on the fact that the PC version was actually ported by Iron Galaxy, who are not British. So, and that one went horribly wrong for them. So,
I feel if you ask Dave Lang, he could do a very convincing British accent, so it's fine.
I await his response.
But also, John Carmack was awarded the BAFTA Fellowship by the Academy, which I think you can't dispute. Like, John Carmack is very deserving of that kind of award, right? Like,
he's been in the industry long enough. He probably deserves it.
Fucking ever, and basically built an entire genre with his bare hands.
Motherfucker made give him all the awards.
Yeah, like you can't dispute that. This guy's like, I basically did all of this. I kind of pioneered a lot of 3D game stuff. Pretty much, yeah.
And now he's doing similar things with Oculus Rift.
Yeah, and then I've done all the 3D stuff, now to VR, next.
Also, he is the most baffling person in the world to listen to. Because he just talks in like weird magical incantations.
Yeah,
everything he speaks about is like weird code.
It does seem like that. He's not great at dumbing things down for his audience.
No,
I think he's just too used to talking to engineers. So he's just like, yeah, everyone's an engineer, right? It's fine. Dave, tell us about Dark Souls 3, which when I mentioned earlier, you sort of gave a yelp of fear. How do you feel about Dark Souls?
As I always do whenever I play any of the Souls games, I love it, but it's an abusive relationship.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a very... Those are not, not friendly games, shall we say.
I have a theory that the Souls games don't have traditional fans. They just have people that they've managed to inflict Stockholm syndrome.
Pretty much.
I was just thinking that. As soon as you said that, I was thinking, oh God, has it happened to me?
Yeah, I think if you're a fan of the Souls games, then you should really probably see someone.
Yeah, I might call my doctor in the morning. Here's the thing about Dark Souls 3 is that I really, really loved Bloodborne to the point where I didn't feel it was too taxing because I was used to how the Souls games operated. But at the same time, it was one of those interesting games that it's a case of the design is really, really good, and I really enjoyed the design of the previous game. So Bloodborne was really, really well designed, and I completely agree with BAFTA on that particular one about the actual design of the game being really good. But Dark Souls 3 still has its tricks up its sleeve, and there have been points where my controller, bearing in mind it's one of those 20th anniversary PlayStation ones, I nearly broke that several times on at least a couple of the bosses because they are absolute swines. They do things that you're not exactly expecting them to do, and as such, it's incredibly unpredictable, and yet I still love it because when you do finally figure out how to defeat the boss and actually achieve said defeating of the boss, there's that sense of joy that courses through your veins.
That sounds kind of contrary to what I would assume a Dark Souls game, to my perception of what a Dark Souls game is, because I kind of thought that they were all about learning the patterns of a boss and learning how the bosses work, and then figuring out how to survive that and exploit.
Well, yeah.
So if they have an element of unpredictability in them, surely that breaks that.
It's a way of keeping veteran players on their toes because we've been through this. This is now the 5th time that From Software have created this sort of game.
It's so funny the way people talk about it. We've been through this 5 times now.
Yeah. So, and as a result, they were kind of running out of surprises. I mean, you just look at Dark Souls 2 and their Scholars of the First Sin expansion that they put out. That was essentially a fully redesigned game because they just redeployed every single enemy. They didn't actually change up, how the bosses fought you, or how the basic enemies fought you, or anything like that. All they did was just said, these guys that were sitting on the top of this hill, there's now 5 of them rather than 2. So good luck with that. And as a result, Bloodborne was such a huge breath of fresh air because it was a completely different way of... it was a far more offensive combat system compared to Dark Souls, which is certainly, in my experience, a lot of hiding behind shields and poking them with a stick. But Dark Souls 3, I was always a little bit worried about whether or not it was going to be like Dark Souls 2 or whether it was going to be more like Bloodborne in the sort of it's more aggressive. And actually what I found is it still has the capacity to surprise you. There are still some things, some tricks left up their sleeve at From Software. And as a result, yes, you're figuring out patterns, but then the boss changes up how they fight you, or the basic enemies even do so as well. And as a result, you've got to adapt to that as well. So it's like an extra level of complexity. And as a result, I really enjoyed my time with it because I felt as if it was still surprising me. Even at the later stages, there was some absolutely epic boss battles. that are on par with some of the series' best.
Have you finished it?
I finished it, and I am now doing a second playthrough.
Okay, so congratulations. Because
I didn't think they were finishable. I thought you.
Yeah, you finished a Dark Souls game. Where does it sit with? I mean, what's your history with the Dark Souls games? Are you one of these people that thought that Dark Souls 2 was absolute rubbish, or do you think that sits with the other Souls games? Have you played them all?
Dark Souls 2 is definitely the black sheep of the family, and a lot of it is down to the enemy design and how they were made, in my eyes. So a lot of the early bosses in Dark Souls 2 are humanoids with giant weapons and things like that. Like the first boss you come against is a guy with a giant spear, and then later on you come up against the same guy with a giant spear and his friend, who also has a giant spear. So
2-for-1 discount on giant spears.
Exactly. So and also the refight against the bell gargoyles as well. So, like in the first Dark Souls game, you fight two these gargoyles. One of them appears, straight as the fight begins, and then all of a sudden another one comes in halfway through. In Dark Souls 2, you face up against 3 at first, and then another load come in. So there was a lot of rehashing, and that was what I was afraid of.
Sequel by the numbers.
Yeah. And that's why I was really, really afraid that Dark Souls 3 was going to be, back to that sort of level of unoriginality, as it were. Yeah. I mean, it still had original things in Dark Souls 2, but it didn't feel as well put together as the original Dark Souls or even Demon Souls, which I still think is a really, really good game that stands the test of time. But Dark Souls 3 definitely did a lot of things that I was looking for it to do. It's constantly surprised me. I didn't feel I was doing the same thing over and over again. Yes, it's very similar in terms of how it plays to the other Dark Souls games, even if it is a bit more aggressive as a result. But there are still some things that I haven't even figured out about Dark Souls 3. Like, I only found out how hollowing affects the player today. And it's taken the internet and the fact that the game is now out and someone to look at how hollowing works and share on to the community exactly what it actually does. And it turns out that by absolute fluke, I was doing the exact right thing, but I wouldn't have known that. And there's no way that it will tell you what hollowing actually does. So,
they seem to walk an incredibly fine line between what would traditionally be considered incredibly bad game design, like obfuscating things that are essential for the player to know. And they walk that line and at the same time make it so that it's incredibly engaging to a certain audience. So those people are always trying to dig into it and find the information that they need.
I think the reason why it works in Dark Souls games, as opposed to a lot of other games, it's not generally something that's required to complete the game. It's just something that's there that will make it easier if you discover it.
Do you think that's more rewarding, that it's something that you can, you don't have to have it to complete the game, it just kind of helps you progress more easily? Do you find that makes it more rewarding, that it's kind of an optional thing rather than requiring you to work out how all the systems work in order to complete the game? Like, do you think it makes more rewarding once you work out a system, is what I mean, I guess?
The very basic stuff, it does feed to you a little bit.
Okay. More so than previous Dark Souls games, or?
About the same, in all honesty. Okay. I mean, there's a couple of things there that I honestly didn't work out until halfway through the game how you even do them, even though I think the tutorial area actually showed it. But I didn't realize the significance of weapon arts until I fought the first of the major bosses in the game that's named in the introduction of the game. I didn't even discover what weapon arts did and the uses of weapon arts. And yet I've been doing it all the time because parrying with a shield is technically a weapon art now. So it's little things like that when it suddenly dawns on you what it actually does, then depending on how well you use it, it actually makes the game more rewarding because it's something you figured out rather than something that the game force-fed to you. It's the antithesis of going through a tutorial section in the beginning of a game where the character stops and someone talks at you. You don't feel as if you learnt something. You felt as if the game was just teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big difference. Yeah,
it kind of sounds like learning a language by talking to natives.
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same principle as learning a language. I work in my day job with a lot of people whose first language is not English. And I'm starting to pick up on things that they say when they're talking to people in another language, because I've heard them say certain phrases like, Germans like to say genau quite a lot. And I didn't realize the significance of that, but I picked up that it was something that they say a lot. And it turns out that it just means no problem. But as a result, I felt as if I discovered something, a sort of trait that they have when they're speaking to each other, that I wouldn't have gotten by looking at a book or having someone talk at me about it.
Yep.
So yeah, I completely agree with Peter that it's playing Dark Souls is like learning a language.
But so what I'm wondering about is you were saying it kind of I mean, if I understand correctly, you're saying it kind of adapts to your play style.
Yeah, I mean, my first run that I did was as a magic user, which I don't normally do in Dark Souls games. So it took a fair bit to, work out how certain magics work. I mean, I was playing as a pyromancer and just throwing fireballs all over the place.
Okay, that's pretty awesome.
And yeah, it felt awesome doing that. And I'm now playing the game as a sort of melee character, which is what I would normally roll as.
Okay.
And yeah, it's completely different in terms of playstyle, but when you figure out how you do certain things, it becomes a lot more intriguing and a lot more involved in terms of how you're playing the game.
Do you feel that adds genuine depth to it overall? Like, obviously, the Souls games have got that replayability in a way, just because they're such difficult games. But do you feel that, like, it... Because for what you've said here, like, to me, it sounds like it's the same core formula with some new ideas introduced, which is always good to see.
Yeah.
But, like, how fresh do you think it feels? That's what I kind of want to know, yeah. How fresh do you think, like, the systems they're adding and those kind of... those ideas, etc.?
The core basic stuff is not that much different from any of the other Souls games, or even Bloodborne for that matter. In that it's still the same buttons and you can still get by doing the same things you've done before. But where Dark Souls 3 has like little things like the significance of embers, for example, is what it actually is. It's exactly the same as the human effigies that you found in Dark Souls 1 and 2, but it's just thematically different. And yet people were trying to work out, is there a damage bonus when you're hitting it whilst under the influence of embers? Or what's this hollowing thing? And what's the significance of that? And there's like little things within the Dark Souls games, and a lot of it's to do with lore. There's a fair bit to do with the actual combat mechanics. And as a result, it's that little niggling feeling that there's something you haven't worked out yet. And the game is not force-feeding you it, but it is hinting at something. And when you finally work out what it is and how you can exploit that to make your time maybe a little bit easier, then, like, I'll give you the actual hollowing example that I did. When I rescued an NPC from his predicament, he turned up in the sort of hub area. And as a result, I thought he was just going to be a merchant, but he had this rather intriguing option of being able to level up, which you can normally only do that whilst talking to the Shrine Maiden in the hub world. So having another person level you up for nothing was kind of sweet, but I also worked out quite quickly that there was a consequence to it, but I didn't know what it was. And then as I was leveling up, suddenly, and I won't spoil what exactly happens as a result of this, but something happens which is irreversible, but it's something that you did that caused it, and you gained a benefit to it. And okay. I know I'm being rather vague with that particular description, but I've just realised that it's a bit of a side quest spoiler thing. But
that's
well,
and with like the thing with I find about interesting about Dark Souls is even talk about mechanics in too much depth in that game is almost a spoiler, just because of the way its systems are set up.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the reason why humanity is something I'm willing to be a little less vague on, because I only really just discovered it, and it's not obvious in the slightest. Like even what happens.
It's just those games as a whole really interest me. The idea that there are just the huge community kind of. It's almost like a puzzle, like just solving what the discovering the concepts of the game, etc.
It's a bit like an ARG.
It's just really interesting that I don't think there are any other games where how the core mechanics of the game work, like discovering how the core mechanics work, are part of the game, and that's just really cool. It's a really interesting twist on the normal way we perceive games and how games are built, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that's partially at least because the mechanics of the game are very much built around the same themes as the lore. Themes of like rebirth and coming back and trying things again.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
are all built into the lore, but they're also all key mechanics.
Yeah, I mean that's very true. I just find it like because most games you are introduced to mechanic, work out how to use the mechanic, work out how to combine it with what else you've got. Whereas this is work out what the mechanic is the first step.
Mm-hmm. But it is really fascinating to see. Not to belabor a point, but it is really fascinating to see the community kind of codify that language of the game.
Mm. I kind of find that interesting with almost any game, with even when you look at the language that's emerged around MOBAs in just a few years. Like, there are so many technical terms that high-level players use in those games now. And even that high-level players kind of established the language, and it has bled down to sort of the average player base in it. But that, again, just fascinates me. And the same even when you look at, not with all MOBAs, but I think when you look at stuff like EVE in particular, the way you just get emergent gameplay in that title, where you just get emergent political factions, etc. I mean, like, EVE is in the middle of a huge interstellar war right now between two gigantic factions. And there are literally, like, components of religious war in this thing there, like, in this virtual space battle, and none of it's coming from CCP. It's the people playing EVE created their own space pope. Like, that's a thing that happened. And, like, there are factions in one of the sides of the war who aren't convinced they should go to war because they're not sure it agrees to the tenets of their religion, and there are some others who feel that they should remain isolationist. And again, none of this has come from the developers. This is all player-led, and that's incredible.
This sounds worrying like Warhammer.
Yeah, but if
but
Warhammer was
not
a persistent...
quite the same in that there's no like demonic influences or anything like that. But having a single person who is revered to half the population of this entire MMO is.
But the thing is, I don't know if the Space Pope is like a dude or if they've just invented a Space Pope.
It's probably some NPC. Just
no,
like
I think
squirrel
I
or
think
something.
it's just. I need to wait. Eve Space Pope.
It's just a fictional character then.
No, it's a guy. It's a guy called Charles White.
What?
Oh my god. An actual person has been elected Space Pope.
So he wears like
what the heck?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I've just seen the picture of him.
There's a picture of a guy kissing his hand.
Yeah. That's what I'm looking at. And he's just got this off-camera look whilst he's blessing him as he kisses his ring.
Oh.
Oh my word.
I mean, to be fair, he works at NASA's JPL. So if you go select a guy as Space Pope, that's a solid guy to select, I feel.
Yeah, I would totally agree.
The dude who literally works for NASA, you're like, yes, you may be Space Pope.
It's a bit weird though, isn't it?
Yeah, but like that kind of stuff just intrigues me. That also I can never play Eve again.
No, I never played Eve in the first place, but
I played Eve. It's very intimidating. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about something a little bit more lightweight. Peter, you've been playing Superhot, which I don't think we've talked about in the podcast before. So tell me about Superhot. I want to know all about Superhot. I want to know about how many times the game says Superhot.
The game says Superhot all the time. Literally, if you finish a level and don't press a button, it will just say Superhot indefinitely.
Sweet, that's what I wanted.
So it wasn't developed in Britain, but if it had been, it would have been a shoo-in for a Persistent Game Award. Superhot is a first-person shooter where time only moves when you do.
See, that's great as a core idea. It's just genius.
Mm.
Yeah, well, it came out of a game jam, I think. So I don't know how much of that was part of the game jam concept.
There was a very old preview build of it from like a couple of years before the release of it. I remember seeing.
Yeah, they've got they worked on it at a game jam, and then they released a version on their website. I think since like 2013 or something. It's been around for years. Yeah. There's been like this, basically like a proof of concept that you can play online. That's really good. It's kind of like a puzzle thing. And it's much more pure and focused and, maybe not refined, but just because it is like one simple single idea, the online version of it, I personally think as it gets its concept across in a much more understandable way than the game itself. The game itself starts with, kind of like a fake DOS prompt. And a chat window and some guy telling you about a game called Superhot that you can only play through the cracked version of it, and then he sends you the crack and you play it. You open it up on your desktop and it loads into this first-person shooter. So it has this kind of metagame layer to it.
There's a lot of that.
That's a bit weird.
Recently, actually. There was, and I can't believe I'm even going to say this on the podcast. Pony Island. If you've not seen it, it's worth looking at just to say, what the hell is this? Anyway, sorry, go on.
I would second that. Pony Island is weird, but kind of a wonderful weird.
Yes.
So Superhot is it's a first-person shooter, but it's not an action game. It's more like a strategy game. So it's very simplistic art style, very kind of like low poly, almost cel-shaded. Everything's black and white, apart from the enemies that are red, and the trails from bullets, which are red. And they don't move. Nothing in the environment moves unless you're moving. Or at least it moves incredibly, incredibly slowly. So you have to move through the environment and dispatch all of the enemies using firearms which have limited ammunition, or you can just punch them until they explode. It takes about 3 punches. Or there are baseball bats or katanas. You can pick things up and throw them. There was one level where I basically spent the bulk of my playtime picking pool balls up off a pool table and throwing them at a bartender who had a shotgun.
Okay.
Just desperately trying to make time to get to him, because it's the game itself is kind of about figuring out when the enemies are going to shoot at you, avoiding that line of the shot, and at the same time gaining ground on them, or figuring out where they're moving to so that you can shoot them. So you have to, it's kind of a bit of spatial awareness needed, but you have to figure out where they're going, like their movement trajectory, and how quickly they're going to get there, but bearing in mind that they're only going to be moving when you move. So you can rotate and you can free look and you don't lose any time. So time moves incredibly slowly. So like if they shoot bullets at you while you're just looking around, it will still travel towards you, but really, really slow. And then as soon as you take a step, whether it's a strafe or forwards or backwards, or perform an action like pull the trigger of your gun, then time speeds up. So you have to work your way, it's really hard to explain. You have to work your way through a level getting rid of enemies by shooting them or hitting them. And at the same time, avoid them shooting you. If you get shot once, if you get hit with a bullet once, then you have to restart the level. And it's kind of an instant restart thing. You just hit a button.
Well, that's good, because it's basically like, it's a puzzle game. So it's basically a puzzle game, right? Like, so.
It is, yeah, it is kind of a puzzle game.
But that's what I mean. So in that kind of scenario, that's when you want a quick restart, because you're just like, just restart the puzzle.
Yeah.
Let's go again.
Yeah, absolutely. And because you will spend quite a lot of time getting shot so that you can figure out where enemies are moving to. Although they don't always move on the same predetermined paths, and they do occasionally spawn at different times.
Is it a little bit like Frozen Synapse? In like, they'll
yeah, that would be the closest comparison.
They'll go paths unless they have a reason not to, kind of.
To an extent, yes, but sometimes they do deviate as well. They're like the level with the pool table that I was throwing pool balls at. The enemies spawn there. There's one behind a bar and there's one that comes from a back room. But sometimes there was an enemy running across the room from the right as well, and you kind of have to account for him. And a lot of the levels, because it is like so time based, and you can throw your gun as well. So they have very limited ammunition. I think handguns have like 3 or 4 bullets in them. And once it's used up and it's useless to you, but you can throw anything at all that you can pick up. So you can throw your gun on rushing enemies, and that kind of knocks them back. And if they're carrying a weapon, then that knockback means that they let go of their weapon and you can catch it from the air. So there's an element of almost like storyboarding or choreographing these really intense, fast action, like almost like John Woo movie scenes. So it's really cool in that way. And then at the end of the level, it will play it, what you did, all at like full speed without any of the pauses.
Okay.
So you can see what you did. It's really cool.
So one of the things the only thing that I've really seen that that hasn't been said is one of the things that you can do is with the katana, you can actually cut bullets as they're coming towards you in order to deflect them.
Yes.
I think that's just such a cool idea that
you can also shoot other bullets as they come towards you.
Yeah.
Shoot them out of the air. There's an achievement for that. And the achievement for it is called No, He Didn't. But yeah, because everything's in such slow motion with these big pauses in between action, you can kind of time shots or time swings with the katana perfectly. So that is a legitimate strategy. It's not just something which is pure luck. You can think, well, this bullet's coming right towards me. I can either sidestep it, but I maybe wouldn't have time to get out of the way, or I can swing the katana at it and get past it that way. Although I've never actually done that myself. I tend to be much more of a let's duck behind a pillar and try and pick them off one at a time, slowly. So my John Woo action sequences are all a bit cowardly.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a much more measured approach than your average action film.
Yeah. The pool table level that I keep talking about was, I had a lot of problems getting past that level. And the way I did it was by throwing every ball on the pool table at the bartender and hiding behind the pillar for extended periods of time and jumping out from behind the pillar and punching.
This is a weird story.
Just as they rushed onto me.
I really hope someone's coming to the podcast at this point.
catching a lot of guns in the air by throwing my empty gun or throwing whatever gun I had at a person and then catching their gun. And basically fudged my way through it. But you can kind of do that on a lot of levels. You can sort of just force your way through it a little bit. But at times you will need to be like really precise about where you move and when you move, because time is such a big issue. And it just has a really beautiful presentation, and it has this weird meta game that goes over the top of it, which is to do with like hacking and corporations and almost like people being plugged into a matrix kind of thing, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure where that goes yet. I haven't finished the game yet, so I'm not sure where that's going to end up. But it's all kind of interesting, and it's just really refreshing to see a game which is essentially, it's all the same mechanics of a first-person shooter. It's just done as a puzzle game or as a puzzle strategy game. And with this fantastic low-poly art style as well.
I might have to pick that one up when it's on sale next.
Yeah, I think it came out at the end of February on Steam. It's meant to be coming out on Xbox One, but it was meant to be out in March, and it never
definitely not
appeared,
March now.
So I'm not sure what's happened to that. So, no. But I would imagine it will be getting all the usual discount rounds of Steam coming into the summer. But yeah, it's really cool. I don't think it was that expensive to buy to begin with. So I think it's definitely worth a punt if anybody's looking for an interesting, different take on a genre. Because it's kind of a different take on first-person shooters and a different take on puzzle games.
Well, it's nice that it fits kind of within the tropes of first-person shooters, and then does something very different with those established conceits. That's a really nice idea. I'm definitely going to try it at some point soon. It's a really fascinating game. Super weird, but super cool at the same time. Talking of things that are both weird and cool, I went to Rezzed last week, which is full of things that are weird and cool. I saw a wide variety of weird and cool stuff. I saw a game that you pressed buttons. I didn't actually play it, but I saw it. It's called Knife to Meet You, and it was in the Left Field collection. And it's a game where there's an actual knife, like a physical, real world knife, and you have to avoid getting stabbed.
Well,
it's like a butter knife, so not stabbed so much. But yeah, that's weird.
So
I don't even know what the concept of is. There's just two buttons and a knife that swings between the two buttons.
So is the knife on the screen, or is it like in your hand and you have to?
No, it's a knife. So there's basically it's a wooden box and there's a knife and two buttons, and it's 2-player game. And for reasons I haven't established, because I didn't play it, but I was just there, the knife swings between the 2 players, and if it hits you, you lose. It's like there's no screens involved at all.
I mean, it's not the strangest game I've seen on a Left Field collection that still goes to that puppet thing from last EGX.
That's pretty weird.
But that's certainly up there. So
I mean,
it's like
the
a
weirdest
pendulum.
thing I definitely saw was the coffin game.
What?
There was a VR game. You wore a VR head. This was there last year, wasn't there? This year, but you wore you wore like a Oculus, and then you got in a coffin. I can't say any more about that because I was like, I'm not getting in that coffin. But
game development's weird.
Yeah, very.
Yep.
But yeah, like there was super weird stuff there, but it's a good time. We talked lots of stuff. The problem is I won't talk about Rez, but I can't remember what we talked about last week. But one of the things that I did want to briefly mention was a game called Event Zero, which I definitely didn't talk about last week, and is very interesting, puzzly kind of game. Where how does this go? So it's a sci-fi game. You're on like a ship. You go around corridors. But the only way the interaction mechanic is a little bit weird, but it makes sense in context. In that, to move forward, you click the mouse. So you basically point where you want to go, and you hold down the mouse and that moves you forward. And the reason you can't use like normal WASD keys is that when you get up close to a monitor, you type because there's physical keyboards, but it's all like it's kind of like 1950s, 60s styling, and there's a little movie that plays that reveals it was all like a secret mission where they built like one of this magic singularity drive or something and sent it into space, and now you've found that ship in the far-flung future. So you're typing like proper old school looking keyboards and stuff, and it's just like, I really liked it. But that's the whole idea is that it's almost like like an old kind of where you done original dungeon crawlers where you like go north, etc. It's a little bit like that, but it's more like you're actually talking to a chatbot, I guess. So there's an AI that running the ship, and you have to.
Oh, this is like the broken AI game.
Super weird.
I've
really
seen
cool,
something of this.
But you're talking to an AI, and you have to like
s-
convince it to be like, open this door, open that door. So you try to find the right sequence of commands that does stuff. But it gives you little hints to go on. But yeah, it's just.
But it kind of responds to directly what you
Yeah, so
said,
it's
doesn't it?
it's
Like
very
an AI
chatbot-y, so it's really smart like that. But then if you get the commands right, it will do the thing. So if you like open this door, it'll open the door for you, blah blah blah. There's a really nice bit where, so there's definitely gonna be stuff that's a little bit more like a hacking game, because there's one bit where there's like some post-it notes written next to the that are next to the screen, and it's basically commands to run a specific program, and that lets you get into memory, and then from memory you're pulling up images, because it basically assigns a memory location to every key on the keyboard. So you're pulling up the right memory locations to form a picture of an eye, and then you use that picture of an eye and you go over to like a iris scanner, and it takes the input from the computer instead of the input from your actual physical eyes, and like loads that in. And it goes, yep, that's the right eye, and opens the door for you. And then the AI goes, how the fuck did you get in this room? Even I can't override that door. And so that's kind of a neat bit. I really like that. But yeah, it's just like, it's very, very, very weird, but really enjoyable. Like, it's just a cool, puzzly thing. It looks really, really, really nice. And the demo ends with a big cliffhanger where, so I think your ship was like damaged or something, and so the remains of your ship are basically crashing into the ship you explore, and you're standing like at a big observation window, and suddenly like debris starts to hit it, and it ends when the window breaks and you get sucked into the vacuum of space. And so I'm like, what the fuck happens next? So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a really interesting game. It's got that's a very interesting concept.
I read something about it a long time ago, I think, and it sounded really interesting with the broken AI. It sounded kind of like Portal and GLaDOS,
it's a bit like that, but it's a bit more. The AI is more on your side, I think, than GLaDOS. The AI doesn't seem like sinister. It whereas like GLaDOS was like bad, crazy. This AI more seems kind of eccentric. It just seems like it's gone a bit. It seems like it's gone a bit weird, but it's not. Doesn't seem like it's malicious at all.
Yeah, not malevolent, but still a bit broken.
It's just got a bit loopy, I think. So it's just like when debris hitting it, it's apologetic, and like debris hitting the ship, it's kind of apologetic. It doesn't seem like it's in a sarcastic way. It's just sorry. But there's like neat bits as well where, so at certain points you go past like damaged terminals, but you can still see like that you could still interact with it, but it's all wonky. So like the screen's all out of alignment and stuff. And that's kind of nice that they've gone to that extent rather than just being like, oh, that terminal's damaged, it doesn't work. Like you can still sort of use it, but it's just all broken, and I think that's a nice idea. So yeah, I would I talked about loads of games last week. I talked about PSVR last week, which I like. I like PSVR. But yeah, one of the ones I didn't is Event Zero. I'm actually just writing about it in a minute, so that a piece about that will probably have gone up before you hear this. But it said, yeah, that was a really cool sci-fi game, and there are that and the Turing test, which I talked about last week. I've written like a full preview of that. And the things I really liked about both of those is they've gone like they've both got like a very 2001 feel to the aesthetic.
Oh,
like
okay.
2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a really nice touch.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I was talking about the Broken AI thing. It was 2001 that I was kind of thinking, but I just couldn't remember the reference.
Yeah, so it's not quite like that, but the aesthetic of the ship feels very like that, which is really cool. And it's nice that they're doing those kind of things, and that kind of stuff seems to be coming back into style a little bit more. Whereas before, like there was kind of the sci-fi kind of went all either like kind of went Halo-y, where the human ships are all like super rigid militaristic, and the Covenant ships in Halo were all super weird and glowy, and that was kind of what we had for a while in like all sci-fi, and we're going somewhere else now, which is nice.
I mean, System Shock kind of had the sort of dystopian abandoned spaceship thing happening, but it's good to see that sort of aesthetic is coming back as almost from the sounds of things anyway.
Yeah. It's what you want, I think. I think it's not necessarily just that I want, but that's a really nice, it's a really distinctive, crisp style, and it just looks super cool, and not enough people have played with it, so that's what I want to see more of.
And it is slightly different from the usual, like the used future stuff that Star Wars is so famous for,
sure.
And also the sort of crisp, clean stuff that games like Mass Effect do. It's just another sort of aesthetic to the sci-fi genre, which is always interesting to have, I think.
Dave, you played a game called Eisenhorn Xenos.
Yeah. So
sound positive.
Speaking of space and the fact that things can either be really, really clean or really, really dirty, Warhammer Universe has always been a really grotty sounding place, but the games haven't really explored it all that much beyond like Space Marine years ago and the various what are they called, Dawn of War games as well, where it's just armies fighting each other on a battlefield. But we don't really explore much of the lore. And this is where Eisenhorn Xenos comes in. Eisenhorn Xenos is an adaptation of Dan, I've got to get this right, Dan Abnett's book, or series of books, the Inquisitor series, which centers around a character called Gregor Eisenhorn, who is this badass Inquisitor who is essentially chasing a conspiracy. And Eisenhorn Xenos is essentially a straight-up adaptation in video game form of the first book. And when I was actually playing it, I really enjoyed it for what it was. It was relatively basic, but I was really immersed in, what the actual, how the story was written, not so much on how it was delivered. I think that the voice direction is a bit dodgy in places, but we'll get to that in a bit. But in general, I was enjoying it for what it was until I thought about it a little more. And the more I thought about it...
So what is it? What kind of game is it?
It's a third-person action brawler, like the Batman Arkham series.
Okay.
But made with mobile in mind. So everything is single touch on mobile. And the PC version, it does have controller support, but everything is mapped to one button. So if you want to do melee attacks, it's hammer on this button to win. Dodging is done just by pressing A and he rolls out the way. Range weaponry is pressing on one button to fire your gun at the enemy with the circle underneath their feet. And you can't really auto-target from what I can gather, but hopefully that's something that they'll either patch in to the full release, or because I found it quite hard to actually target people in that game precisely. I was just wailing on whoever was currently targeted and, dodge rolling anything else. So it wasn't like it was especially difficult, but it basically felt like a really basic Batman Arkham Asylum style game. And as a result, it just didn't feel, fleshed out. It didn't feel complicated enough to make the combat feel compelling.
Yeah, I would say that's a concern, given that most of the draw to those Batman games is the combat system.
And I think a lot of it is it's actually down to the platform choice. They kind of buried themselves in this expectation that when they first announced the game, this is Pixel Hero Games, it's their it's their second game, but it's their first game that they're also releasing on PC, if that makes sense. But when they first announced it, it was mobile only, and it was only later in development that they announced it was coming to PC. And from what I can gather, it sounds like the mobile version's now been delayed, and the PC version is the one that's getting launched first. So, just to make things all the more confusing. And as a result, they've kind of shot themselves in the foot in terms of the development, from what I can gather, because Eisenhorn Xenos was a very narratively focused book. It was about the intrigue, it was about the conspiracies. And yeah, you get that in the game in the cutscenes, and despite some really awful delivery of lines outside of the main character, who I'm just trying to remember the name of the voice actor now. A guy called Mark Strong, if you've heard of him. He was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the name sounds familiar. I can't place it,
he was also in
familiar.
Kingsman, I believe. Possibly as one of the bad guys. I'm not entirely certain, but then again, I haven't seen Kingsman yet, so that's probably why. But I know he's in it, so... Anyway, he's okay in terms of the delivery of 90% of his lines, but he even has one moment that just took me out completely of all immersion, which is he's speaking to a forum of people who, in this sort of auditorium-like place, as would be depicted in the 40k universe, so a bit like the Senate in Star Wars, for example. And yet he's addressing them as if he's just speaking normally, despite the fact that they're miles away and probably can't hear him, and yet they're still cheering or booing or whatever and reacting to what he's saying. So there's just little things wrong in terms of the presentation, but they're really minor things. Like, I know they're doing stuff to improve the animation quality a little bit, and that is definitely needed, but my actual main problem is the combination of action brawling style Batman style game with mobile. It just doesn't work, and it's not compelling enough for a game that is being released after, say, Dark Souls, where the combat is... Yeah, it's a very, very different game, but it's a compelling combat system because you have the tools on there, and the tools are relatively complex, whereas this is just a button masher.
Yeah, I think at this stage, if you're going to try and attempt that, you either have to do a brand new combat system, or you have to do a combat system which is at least up there and around as good a quality as things like Batman and Shadow of Mordor, and even like the Assassin's Creed games where they're parry.
And the problem is the mobile market will probably say things like, "Oh yeah, this is fine. What are you talking about?" But the problem is you're releasing on PC as well, so
Yeah.
And they're completely different
Standards are
interfaces.
different.
So,
Yep.
You just...
Well, that's the key. I think if you're going to make a game for PC, make it for PC. And the same thing applies for mobile. And there's nothing wrong with them making this kind of game for mobile, and that might work perfectly well. But it falls short when you're playing it on a system which has such a vast array of buttons and controls that you could be using, and yet you still feel hampered by the fact that it's not letting you use any of those controls to make it a more entertaining experience. And that's just a very poor design choice.
I would actually be okay with them just saying, you know what, guys, we're going to overhaul it. We're going to delay it by a good year or so. We're really sorry to the people who pre-ordered it on the pretense that it's going to be out in like a month or so, but it's not ready. And I would be okay with it because I absolutely adored the Inquisitor trilogy. I mean, the second part, Malleus, is a book I read from beginning to end at an age where I really didn't do that all that much. And yet, Malleus was just such a compelling book that I want to see that adaptation. And the fact that they've attempted to adapt Xenos, and the fact that it's not quite at the standard that I was expecting it to be, I just really, really want them just to take a step back and say, look, okay, just need some more time to work things out, make it a bit more of a compelling game for the PC market, release it as a PC game, and make it so that it's remembered not just for the gameplay, so the plot and the story and everything that comes with that, but also because of the gameplay. And I would just...
Yeah, I think obviously there are financial questions to be answered in amongst all that, but it is kind of a shame that they seem to have not chosen a path that they want to go down, but tried to go down two very separate paths. And that's going to always result in the end product's always going to be hampered by one or the other platform. So that's kind of a shame. And I mean, the Warhammer 40k universe is such a massive, and even though there has been plenty of games, it's still largely
because it's such a like you say, it's just so huge. It's
it would be nice to see people exploring.
I think delving into the Black Library, which is their publishing house that they own as a subsidiary at Games Workshop. I think tapping into that is the right way to go, and Pixel Heroes have done the right thing here in trying to tap into that resource. I think that's a fantastic idea. It's just a massive shame that the not only the combat, but also the stealth sections are laughably basic. It's sneak up against this person, hit him round the face. Oh, look, there's a guy over the other side. Just call him over and then sneak round the back and get him as well. And it's like, where's the challenge in that? It's just a very basic stealth system that doesn't make sense. And thankfully, it's not... you don't have to follow the book to the letter in terms of the actual action bit, but it just feels really linear, which is what they're going for. I have no problem with them going linear in terms of the progression, but the gameplay as well, not so much.
We must move on.
Disappointingly basic.
Out of time. So, Peter, hello. Yes, you. I put a section in when we have guests from the other side of the fence. I like to put a section in the podcast called "Pimping Ain't Easy." What have you got to pimp for us, Peter?
Oddworld Soulstorm.
Tell us all about
What is Soulstorm?
It's our next game that we are making. It's based on the feedback we got after Oddworld New and Tasty. Oddworld New and Tasty was a complete ground-up remake of Abe's Odyssey. So everything was completely new, but it was very familiar to people who were big fans of that original Oddworld game. Soulstorm is more than that. So we assessed the feedback that we were getting from fans and what they wanted us to do for our next game. And what we heard from them was that they wanted us to do the same new and tasty treatment, but to Abe's Exodus. But then there was also a subset of fans that were saying, well, we love those old games, but we kind of want to see something brand new from Oddworld. So we kind of figured out that because Exodus, the original Exodus, was so rushed at the time, there was big elements of that didn't get included. There was stuff that we could have done at the time that we just didn't have time to do because it was on such a rushed schedule. That game was made in 9 months, which is almost unheard of. So we thought that we could do both of those things that the fans asked. We could make a complete reimagining remake of Exodus, but also make it a brand new game. So Soulstorm is hung on the basic narrative beats of Exodus, so might feel familiar if people are particularly invested in the old games, but it will have it might have brand new locations, it will have brand new gameplay mechanics, it will all be brand new art, in the sort of new and tasty style, so it'll still be a side-on 2D or 2.5D action game, puzzle action game, but and it's still going to take place in the same sort of areas that Exodus did, but everything about it is going to be brand new, and we're going to build on it in a much, much bigger way than we did for New and Tasty, building on Abe's Odyssey. So yeah, we did that. We announced that, and we announced it on the Monday of GDC, which is kind of a bad idea for anybody that's ever thinking about announcing their brand new video game project. Don't do it on the Monday at GDC when you've flown 6,500 miles around the world and haven't
So
slept.
that seems like the ideal time.
Yeah, it's just perfect. So we announced that, and then we sort of build that in with, obviously all the marketing PR rubbish that people don't really want to hear me talk about. But basically we want to get our Twitter followers up. And so we announced that we were making Soulstorm, and if we hit certain targets on our Twitter followers, we would release assets that we're working on for the new game. So we hit a couple of those targets, and we've released his hand, and we've released the sculpture of his chest with the new tattoos on them, which fans were very impressed with. I think it's fair to say that we got a much better response to that than we could have hoped for, which was lovely because we were hoping for quite a good response.
I mean, that is generally the goal.
Yeah, we were hoping people would be impressed, and then when we put it out, we were kind of blown away by the fact that people were, I think almost unanimously, people were blown away by the tone that we'd taken with it and the sort of the scope of the ambition of the project. Because it would have, I mean, the easy thing would have been to just remake Abe's Exodus, and that would have been fine, and people would have been happy enough with that. But there was stuff that Lorne had always wanted to do with Exodus, but had never had the time when he was making it all those years ago. But now we're in a position where we sort of, the ball's in our hands, and we know what we can do, and we can make those decisions ourselves. Rather than having publishers involved and whatever else goes along with it. So we're in a really good place, and we're really happy with the feedback that we've got so far.
I mean, the problem is, have you spent so long thinking about what you can do? Have you thought about whether or not you should do it?
Some of the ideas that we're talking about, we definitely should do, because they're going to be absolutely
That's fine
awesome.
then.
And I mean, I am quite literally paid to say that, but some of the ideas that are kicking around are things that I'm very excited about as an old fan of the Oddworld games from all those years ago. So it'd be nice to get them out.
I've always wanted to ask someone if they've ever thought about whether or not they should do it. Unfortunately, you have, so it's fine, I guess.
Yeah, ask me again in 2 years when this game's nearly 2 years, I guess. We're aiming for the end of 2017, so ask me again then if I think that we should have done it, and you might get a very different answer. Because making video games is not as much fun as everybody thinks.
That's all right.
I wouldn't know, and I'm probably the only person in this chat room that wouldn't know. I say chat room podcast.
I'm tired all the time, but apart from that, it's all right.
Yep. Tired all the time. Social life suffers. Constantly under pressure to get things out and get things done.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's awesome.
I suppose.
And it's fantastic to see those, like Oddworld. We're so lucky at Oddworld that we have such a dedicated core of fans that we can always kind of dip into and mine their expertise and their enthusiasm for the brand.
Yeah.
So just being able to launch the game, and I mean, we just threw up a website. We didn't do it the traditional route. So we didn't put out a press release. We didn't bring on a PR company the way we do sometimes for like E3 appointments and stuff. Or most people will send out an email blast to everybody that they have on a mailing list with a press release. We didn't do that. We built a website and we got it tonally the way we wanted it. And we wrote a press release and put it on that website. And then Monday morning I think it was like 7 a.m. San Francisco time from GDC, we basically just posted the link on our Twitter and Facebook pages. And within an hour, we'd hit all the major outlets and nearly all the minor outlets. We hit mainstream press. We basically had everybody talking about it, right up until Microsoft announced that they were going to open their network up to be able to do crossplay with PlayStation. And then everybody wanted to talk about that instead, which is to be expected at GDC.
That is quite an interesting story, to be fair. I don't think you can begrudge them that.
No, not at all. It was nice that we could put it out and we were the focus of the game's press for a couple of hours.
I mean, that's always nice.
And that was really cool. It was really cool to see. And then I guess a month since we launched, since we announced, just sort of monitoring what the community's saying and taking that feedback on our social networks, has all been really positive and really nice to see the reaction that we're getting. I mean, if anybody, I don't know, I can't speak for every video games company, obviously, but at Oddworld, we really do read all the social media messages we get, and we monitor things like this, the Oddworld forums. We're constantly looking at that, and we're looking at the Reddit groups and like everything, everywhere that anybody talks about Oddworld games, we try to keep an eye on those places. So it is all that feedback gets taken into account, and I think relatively uniquely, but the way we do it is relatively unique. But I think a lot of people do a similar thing in that we monitor all that and we listen to what people want and we use that to influence what we're going to do. So as a company, we are embarking on a process of spending millions and millions of dollars on making something because that's what we saw the community asking for. And that's always a really nice thing to be involved in because it feels like you're kind of serving a community rather than just making a product.
I mean, but on the other hand, you are just making a product. We'd like to make that very clear. It's a very clinical approach to everything, I assume. You sit down and you're like, if we do exactly this, we'll make $2 million and be done.
Part of it is that. Part of it is figuring out what we think the market wants as well as what our fans want.
I'm disappointed because that was just me being silly and you gave an actual answer.
No, because it's valid. We want, at the end of this process, we want people to buy the game. So we're kind of figuring out what will make a successful saleable game in 18 months to 2 years time. And trying to focus on integrating elements of that into what we have as like a collection of fan service, essentially. But we also have to think about selling it. And, we were successful with New and Tasty, and that's why we can make Soulstorm. And we kind of have to be successful with Soulstorm so that we can make the next thing. So that's all a consideration. But elements of it are figuring all that out and working that out and trying to assess what will be successful. And then elements of it are just sitting down and going, well, I've had this really cool idea, and we'll pass that around in meetings and talk about it. And like somebody will go, well, fuck it, let's mock it up. Let's see what works. Let's have a look at it and explore it a little bit. And if it's a really cool idea and it's fun, then we'll do it just because it's fun.
What if I buy it, but then just resent you the whole time I'm playing it? Not the company, you.
Me personally?
Yeah.
But you buy it at full price on launch day. Yeah, no,
I kind of resent you anyway, so it's not like it'll make much difference.
No,
we have a complicated relationship.
I'll sell myself.
That's what you want. You're like, I will fully accept hatred if you buy the game. Please buy the game.
Yeah, if it keeps me in a job, then you can hate me all you like.
I mean, I hate you anyway, so Mm.
And I am still employed, so...
I assume that's the reason you're employed. Lon gives me a phone call once a week, just checks. Do you still hate Peter? Yes. Well, he's got a job then. Yeah.
Good to go.
All right.
Sign those
questions.
Checks. Ship it.
In the marathon. It's the only question, but we'll be quick. She says that she played Rusty Lake Hotel, which I talked about a few weeks ago. It's a good puzzle game, point and click adventure kind of thing. Like point and click adventure, escape the room, weird story, cannibalism game. Liked it, enjoyable. She would like to know, though, on a completely unrelated note, are any of you Gears fans, and which is your favourite? Hers is Gears of War 3. I had a fabulous experience playing, I believe it was Gears of War 3. Or it might have been 2. I can't remember. But playing it with my friend Matt, playing it co-op, like on his couch together, local co-op, lot of fun. And it being like just, it's a good game, but it's fucking bonkers. Like super weird at the same time. But just, we still have a running gag about Razor Hail, because there's Razor Hail in those games. Where literally it fucking rains razors from the sky, and we're like, who is living here? Why did you colonize this planet? Why was that a decision you made? This planet is so fucking hostile. Why did you think it was a good decision to cause it? It rains razor. Well, it hails razors. That's not good.
It's the world's most emo planet.
Oh, that's a bad joke.
Yeah.
But
sorry.
we're just
it had to go there.
Yeah, like I do like Gears, but it's like, why? Why would you live here?
I like Gears. I never played the first one, but I sort of jumped in on the second one and loved it. And then I thought that the third one, I preferred the narrative delivery on the third one, and sort of the big set piece moments in the third one than the second. But I think the second was overall probably a better game for me.
Oh, so what I did actually like in the third one, the Horde mode in the third one's really good.
Yeah, all that multiplayer bollocks. Never really went.
Yeah, I remember I've played that with my brother, and that's very enjoyable. Like it's just like that's good, and it's interesting because you're because it's co-op rather than competitive multiplayer. Like strategies like camping feel a lot more valid because there's no one being like, don't fucking camp. And in Gears with the cover based system, like finding a good sheltered spot is not. It's kind of like, it's not like camping in other games. It's more an integral part of the experience.
Yeah, it's not camping; it's cover. And Gears was kind of the first mainstream game to make that Horde mode stuff big, wasn't it?
It wasn't the first game that did it.
It wasn't the first
but
game that did it, but it was the first one where it was sort of a big main.
Just wondering when Left 4 Dead came out,
and that was hugely popular. Oh, that doesn't count. That's not the same sort of thing, is it?
Yeah.
Did it have like waves like that?
I'm pretty certain it did. I think it was one of the multiplayer modes. I'll have to look that up at some point. Probably wrong, but I definitely seem to recall that. But I don't know when that was. But no, Gears of War, I've probably not as into it as, say, the pair of you, because I've only played the first one, and that was back in the days when Gamerscore was a big thing, and my brother was absolutely obsessed with Gamerscore and wanted the co-op achievement, and he was like, yeah, you're allowed to play this game. And I'm like, yay! What do I do? I still remember, I'm not sure if it was 1 or 2, actually, because there was one that had that section where if you stepped into the dark, you just got annihilated by bats. And I think that was the first one.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too familiar, so it was probably the first one.
I enjoyed it for what it was, but I've not been that hardcore fan of the Gears franchise. And despite the fact that I've been an Xbox gamer for a relatively long time, it's it's not a franchise I'm overly familiar with, in all honesty.
I think the other thing with the Gears franchise is that it's very much of its time. Like when those games came out, they were fantastic games, but they've been kind of mimicked so much and emulated so much since then. Like, I mean, Gears of War was a massive deal. The first game was a massive deal. But then the hundreds and hundreds of third-person cover-based action shooters that have come out since then kind of, I think, dilute the impact for it. If you go back and play it now, you're likely to play it and think, well, this is like a dozen other games that I've played in the past 2 years. So you kind of have to always remember the timing of those games when they came out. Like I say, the Horde mode in Gears of War was like one of the first times that Horde mode was a big deal in games. And now Horde mode is kind of a standard thing in a lot of multiplayer games like that. So they were very much of their time. But yes, I've very much enjoyed the Gears games that I've played. And like I say, I think the set-piece narrative delivery parts of Gears 3 were phenomenal.
That's it for this week's episode of the podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can tweet us at TSAer Podcast on the Twitter, so you can email us at podcast@TheSixthAxis.com. If you want to get previous episodes, you can go to TheSixthAxis.com, you can go to YouTube, you can go to Stitcher. If you'd like to get in touch personally, at me and Twitch as Halpro, it's HALB Pro. You can get Peter at Claus Blue, you can get Dave as Dave __ Irwin. That is going to do it for this week's episode. So say goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bring back
Goodbye.
The Sixth Axis Podcast.